They found her half frozen beneath a wagon wheel, clutching 2 crying babies in her arms as the blizzard howled across the open plains. By all accounts, Clara McAllister should have died that day, abandoned, widowed, and burdened with more sorrow than any single soul could bear. Yet fate had other plans. A lone cowboy, rugged and battle-worn, stumbled upon this mother and her tiny twins at death's door. What happened next would reshape not only Clara's destiny, but the entire frontier settlement that bore witness. Prepare for a tale of gritty survival, secret vengeance, and impossible love in the untamed Wild West. The storm had rolled in faster than the old ranchers predicted, dark clouds that bruised the skies with ferocious purpose. It was 1887, and the Great Blizzard was already legendary across Montana's high plains. Folks claimed the freeze devoured entire herds of cattle, swallowed up wagons and travelers, and shattered families who learned too late that Mother Nature was a harsher force than any gunslinger. Clara McAllister, a new widow of barely a week, struggled to keep her twins warm under the tattered woolen blanket. 10-month-old William and Wyatt, named in faint homage to the famous Wyatt Earp, were as vulnerable as newborn lambs. She was crouched beside the half-broken wagon that her late husband, James McAllister, had used to ferry them north, chasing a dream of free land near the Milk River. The wooden wheels had snapped during the journey. The wagon had lurched to one side. James was to fix it come morning. But morning never came for him. A raging fever and cough took James in the night, pneumonia most likely, though no doctor was around to confirm. Clara was left alone in the swirling whiteness miles from the nearest settlement or ranch. In the morning, she'd managed to wrap his body in a canvas tarp and lay it in the snow. She had wept until her throat burned, tears freezing on her cheeks. She faced a choice no human soul should ever have to make: bury her husband in a shallow, icy grave, or cling to his body until she could find help. But the wolves would surely come, and her baby's crying had grown fainter as the cold seeped in. By afternoon, she realized that rescue might not arrive in time. The storm raged on, winds shrieking like banshees blowing snow so thick it turned the landscape to a blur of white. She fed her children the last of the condensed milk she had, then pressed them close, whispering lullabies she barely recalled. She prayed. She prayed to the same God that had in her mind robbed her of a good man, a loyal partner, and the father of her children. She prayed for a chance to survive, even though the odds seemed stacked to break her spirit. Her body, weakened by hunger and heartbreak, began to drift into a semi-conscious state. She dreamed of a warm hearth in a little cabin, of James's comforting voice, of her father's old ranch in Kentucky. But hours passed, or perhaps it was minutes. The swirling storm made any sense of time impossible. At length she collapsed near the wagon wheel. When the drifts rose over her boots, she had but one coherent thought left. My children must live. If God would answer only a single prayer, let it be this. Then the world turned silent, as though she were submerged in soft, cold darkness. In her delirium, images of James flitted through her mind. She remembered the day she met him at a church social back in the dusty streets of Dodge City. A mustachioed man named Orville Jenkins had introduced them. Real name, real person. He was a traveling salesman, known for hawking all kinds of oddities. Orville Jenkins at your service, he would say. I've got the West's finest tonics, guaranteed to cure anything from a headache to heartbreak. He'd wink at James and Clara, encouraging them to dance together. The heartbreak cure was never proven, and Jenkins's potions were mostly snake oil, but the chance meeting with James had been the best medicine for Clara's lonely soul. In a few months, they married in a small ceremony officiated by Father Bennett, a retired army chaplain who'd settled in Kansas after the Civil War. The future had sparkled bright. James had plans to start a small ranch, build a home, and fill it with children's laughter. When Wyatt and William were born, it felt like the proudest day of their lives. But money was tight, ranch land was scarce, and the lure of free land up north beckoned them. They hitched up a wagon, said goodbye to their meager farmland, and started the long trek to Montana, hoping to stake a claim. Clara's eyes fluttered open for a moment, seeing nothing but swirling whiteness. A part of her realized she might die here, unburied and unknown, lost to the biting cold. Her final conscious thought was of her babies, two perfect little souls she'd do anything to protect. Miles away, Caleb Thunderwood was heading toward Fort Benton. He was the son of a Cherokee mother and a Scottish father, an unusual union that had shaped him into a hardy, capable man. Long-limbed and barrel-chested Caleb had a face weathered by sun and sand, with a restless look in his amber-flecked eyes. He'd ridden the Chisholm Trail driving cattle, then spent a spell in Deadwood, where he crossed paths with notorious characters like Sheriff Seth Bullock. A skilled shot with a Colt revolver, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd seen enough life to know that fortune shifts like desert sand. He had no intention of braving the great blizzard. Only a fool or a desperate soul would be traveling these parts in the heart of winter. But desperation was precisely what drove Caleb. He'd taken a high-stakes job, delivering a satchel for an influential rancher, John B. Hutchins, who demanded the package reach Fort Benton by a certain date. The pay was substantial enough to settle a few old debts, enough to buy a piece of land and maybe breed horses like his father once dreamed. Yet even his bravado faltered when the blizzard struck. He nearly turned back for a trading post called Hammer's Creek, where an old friend, Eliza Bouchard, ran a makeshift inn. Something deeper pulled him forward, an instinct that told him if he didn't keep riding, he'd regret it. It was as though the wind itself whispered that a life waited out there in the snow, teetering between existence and oblivion. Caleb squinted against the snow flurries, urging his horse, an aging bay mare named Isadora, across the drifts. He didn't see the wagon until almost too late. It looked like a shapeless mound, half buried. Pulling up, he realized something was amiss. The snow had formed steep banks around the wheels, and the entire side was fractured. A battered trunk and a few scattered belongings stuck out, covered in ice and powder. "Hello," he shouted, his voice whipping away in the gale. He spurred Isadora closer and dismounted. He found footprints partially erased by the wind leading behind the wreckage. That was where he saw her, a woman, motionless, pale as the snow around her, clutching two small bundles. Caleb knelt, heart pounding. The woman's eyes were closed, her lips blue. She was near frozen to death. The two babies whimpered faintly, their cheeks raw from the cold. Without hesitation, he removed his heavy duster coat, draping it over them. He felt for a pulse at her neck. It was there, but dangerously weak. "Stay with me," he murmured, rummaging in his saddlebag for whiskey. He pressed the rim of the flask to her lips, tipping a few drops into her mouth. The woman gave the slightest moan, as though she was trapped between worlds. The children were breathing, but barely. He unwrapped them briefly to check for frostbite. Their tiny faces were splotched red. He nestled them under the coat against Clara, hoping the shared body heat would stabilize them. Caleb knew he had to act fast. They'd die in minutes if he couldn't get them to shelter. He looked around in desperation. The nearest settlement he knew of was a small cabin cluster about 5 miles south, run by a man named Angus O'Connell. Angus was a tough Irish immigrant who occasionally provided lodging for travelers. 5 miles in a blizzard might as well have been 50, but it was their only shot. Gently he lifted the woman into the saddle, positioning the babies securely between them. He wrapped all 3 with the coat and whatever blankets he could salvage from the wagon. Then he led Isadora forward, fighting every step with the swirling wind. "Hold on," he begged, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. "Just hold on a little longer." The journey was a grueling blur of ice and exhaustion. Caleb's face stung from the wind, his hands almost numb on the reins. More than once, he wondered if they'd wander off course. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spotted the faint shape of a fence line, a small corral Angus had built for wintering horses. He hollered for help as he approached, praying Angus was still around. A door creaked open, and a lantern's glow cut the gloom. Out stepped Angus, a burly man with an unkempt beard and shoulders like an ox. Standing behind him was his wife Elsie, her apron flapping in the gale. Without waiting for small talk, Caleb hopped off his horse and carefully eased the unconscious trio into Angus's arms. "Get them inside," Caleb ordered, his breath ragged. "They're half dead." Inside the warmth of the cabin, Angus laid the woman on a small cot near the fireplace, while Elsie took the babies. They worked swiftly, removing wet clothes, rubbing cold limbs, heating broth. Caleb hovered anxiously occasionally, stepping outside to care for Isadora, then returning to kneel at Clara's side. It was nearly dawn before the woman's eyelids fluttered open. She stirred, letting out a disoriented cry, as though uncertain whether she was alive or in some afterlife. When she saw the twins in Elsie's arms, she burst into tears. "It's all right," Caleb said, gently, pressing a warm mug into her hands. "They're safe." "You're safe. Drink this." She did as told, though her hands trembled so violently that Angus had to steady her mug. The hot liquid, some sort of beef broth, seemed to bring colour to her cheeks. "What's your name, Miss Elsie?" asked, draping a patchwork quilt across Clara's shoulders. "Clara," she managed between chattering teeth. "Clara McAllister. And the little ones? These are my sons, William and Wyatt." A look of relief and heartbreak warred on her face. "Where is—" My husband." Caleb and Angus exchanged pained glances. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Caleb said softly, removing his hat. "I found your wagon." "Your husband," he sighed, understanding there was no easy way to say it. "He's gone." Clara clenched her jaw, turning away, as though to hide her tears from these strangers. She already knew the answer, but some glimmer of hope had clung to her heart. She inhaled shakily. "Thank you for saving us." Her eyes flicked to the cowboy. "I owe you our lives." Caleb cleared his throat, uncomfortable under her gratitude. "You don't owe me a thing. Just rest. Get your strength back." In that moment, he had no idea how intertwined their lives would become. As the blizzard raged on for several more days, Clara regained enough strength to move about the cabin. Elsie insisted she sleep in the cot by the fire. The twins, once dangerously lethargic, soon found the energy to fuss and cry. That noise to Clara was a gift beyond measure. Caleb did what he could to help Angus around the property, chopping firewood or hauling water. The storm was so fierce that no one dared travel. They survived on dried meats, potatoes, turnips, and the provisions Elsie had stocked for winter. During quiet moments, Clara confided in Elsie about her recent hardships. James's sudden death, the broken wagon, her desperate attempt to keep the babies alive. Elsie listened sympathetically. She too had endured a rough life. She'd buried 2 children in infancy, victims of diphtheria. She knew a mother's grief and fear. One evening, while Angus slept in the loft and Elsie was tending to the twins, Caleb and Clara found themselves alone by the dying embers of the fire. Clara said quietly, her voice still shaky, "I won't forget what you did for me and my boys. You risked your life to save ours." He ran a hand through his hair, looking somewhat abashed. "Couldn't very well ride by and let you freeze." She studied his face, noticing the faint scar on his temple, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of a life spent under the unforgiving sun. He was younger than he appeared at first glance, probably no older than 30. "What will you do now?" she asked. "When the storm passes?" He shrugged. "I've got a job delivering a satchel to Fort Benton. Then I reckon I'll try to head further west, maybe Washington or Oregon territory. I hear a man can make a decent living there, logging or raising cattle." Clara's eyes lowered. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. James was everything." Her voice broke slightly. "We sold what little we had to come here. Now we have nothing. I can't even properly bury him." A heavy silence settled. Caleb felt a pang in his chest, remembering the early death of his own mother. The West had a cruel way of grinding people down to dust. "You'll figure something out," he said at last, forcing a gentle smile. "You strike me as stronger than you realize." She gave him a sad, grateful look. "Maybe." By day 4, the storm subsided enough for Angus, Caleb, and Clara to venture outside. Clara insisted on returning to the wagon to find James and give him a proper burial, while Angus and Elsie volunteered to watch the twins. Caleb offered to accompany Clara to the site. The trip was arduous, but the snow had compacted somewhat. The wind blew bitterly cold, but the sun made an appearance through thin clouds. Clara rode behind Caleb on Isadora, her arms tight around his waist, more for practicality than comfort. She tried not to think how James had been the last man she'd held in such a way. When they reached the wagon, Clara's stomach twisted. The scene looked like a frozen graveyard. They discovered James's body, where she'd left it partially covered by drifts. Caleb set to work digging a shallow pit in the hard ground, using a shovel Angus had given him. The silence was broken only by the sound of scraping snow and Clara's quiet sobs. She knelt beside her husband's lifeless form, pressing her forehead to his cold cheek. "I'm so sorry," she whispered over and over, tears mingling with the snow. Caleb stepped back, giving her a moment of privacy. He stood sentinel, scanning the horizon, mind-churning. He thought about how fleeting life was out here. One moment you had hopes and dreams. The next you lay in an unmarked grave on the side of a desolate trail. When the burial was done, Clara used a smooth stone to mark the spot, carving James McAllister with a small knife Caleb gave her. Then she tucked a piece of James's shirt under the rock as a personal token. The tears she shed froze into crystals on her lashes. They headed back to Angus's cabin in silence. By the time they arrived, the sun had sunk low, painting the horizon in fiery oranges and pinks. Clara felt hollow, as though part of her soul lay buried in that frozen earth alongside James. With the storm past, talk turned to what would happen next. Angus and Elsie, though kind, did not have the means to support more people indefinitely. Caleb had to leave soon for Fort Benton, or risk losing the promised payment. Clara and her twins had nowhere to go, no money, no supplies. One afternoon, while Angus was in the barn and Elsie rocked the twins to sleep, Caleb found Clara outside gathering eggs from the chicken coop. She wore one of Elsie's old cloaks, her hair tucked under a woolen cap. She still looked pale, but a determined set had settled in her jaw. "How you holding up?" he asked, leaning against the fence. "I've decided I can't stay here," she said bluntly. "Elsie and Angus have done enough. I need to figure out a future for my boys." He frowned. "You can't just ride off alone. Too dangerous. And winter's only just begun. You saw what the last storm was like." She took a shaky breath. "I know. But what choice do I have?" Caleb shifted uncomfortably. His sense of honor warred with practicality. He had to schedule responsibilities. Yet how could he abandon a widow and her children to fate? "Come with me to Fort Benton," he found himself saying. "It's a fair-sized town. Might be you can find lodging or some kind of work. Once I deliver my package, I could maybe help you figure something out." She hesitated, searching his face. "I wouldn't want to impose. You've already done more than enough." "It's not an imposition," he insisted. "I promised myself that if I could do one good thing in this world, I'd see it through. It won't be easy, but it's your best chance." She swallowed. "Then I'll come." Her voice softened. "Thank you." They left a day later after heartfelt goodbyes to Angus and Elsie. The sun shone, but the temperature hovered well below freezing. Caleb bundled the twins in blankets and strapped them in a makeshift sling so Clara could hold them as they rode double on Isadora. They traveled slowly, mindful of hidden drifts and ice. Fort Benton lay nearly 50 miles northeast, a route complicated by rugged terrain. Caleb was no stranger to adversity, but leading a widow and 2 infants through such conditions was a heavy responsibility. He rationed their food carefully, scanning the horizon for any hint of trouble. After the second day, black clouds loomed again, threatening more snow. They pressed on until they found an abandoned trapper's cabin near a creek. The roof was in rough shape, but it provided some shelter. Caleb started a fire in the dilapidated hearth, while Clara fed the twins from a jar of mashed beans and potato Elsie had packed. When the babies slept, Clara and Caleb talked in hushed tones. He asked about her life with James, how they'd met the dream they'd had for a fresh start in Montana. She inquired about his past, his childhood in Oklahoma Territory, how he'd been drifting ever since his father died. The conversation was intimate without being romantic, driven by a shared understanding of loss and survival. That night, Clara awoke to the sound of the wind rattling the cabin door. She saw Caleb sitting up, gun in hand. She sat up abruptly, heart pounding. "What is it?" she whispered. "Coyotes, I reckon," he said quietly, pointing to the cracks in the wall. Outside, faint snarls and howls echoed. "They smell us, maybe the horses. I'll keep watch," she nodded, hugging her knees. The presence of this stoic cowboy made her feel safer than she cared to admit. By morning, the coyotes were gone. They ate a meager breakfast and resumed the trek, forging on, until finally near dusk on the 4th day, the distant sight of Fort Benton's rooftops broke the horizon. Fort Benton bustled with activity despite the cold. Once known as the world's innermost port along the Missouri River, the town had grown as a trading hub. It had wooden sidewalks, a few saloons, a modest hotel, a sheriff's office, a church, and an assortment of shops. Muddy streets were frozen solid, dotted with wagons and riders. Caleb led them straight to the stocky 3-story building that housed the freight office. He needed to deliver Hutchins's satchel. Inside he found Mr. Hamilton, the freight manager, a portly man with wire-rimmed glasses, who verified the delivery and handed Caleb an envelope of cash. While Caleb attended to his business, Clara waited outside, cradling the twins. They drew stares from passers-by, some merely curious, others suspicious. A young mother, obviously poor, with 2 infants and no husband. Clara shifted uneasily, wishing she were invisible. When Caleb emerged, he counted the money briefly. "All right, let's find you a place to stay." They tried the local hotel, but the manager, a sour-faced woman named Dolores Hicks, demanded more money than Caleb could spare. Next, they checked with the church. Father Lyons was sympathetic, but had only a single cramped room available, and that, too, was likely to be claimed soon by other travelers in dire straits. Eventually, they found a small boarding house run by Mrs. Pruitt, a stern widow in her 60s, who offered them a single room in the attic at a modest price. It was drafty and smelled of mothballs, but it was a roof over their heads. Caleb paid for a week in advance. Once they settled, Clara sat on the rickety bed, bouncing Wyatt on her knee while William slept. "Thank you," she said, her tone weary, yet sincere. "I'll find some work soon, so I can pay you back." Caleb shrugged. "I've got a little left. Don't worry about it yet." Truth was, he wasn't sure how he'd manage either. He'd banked on being able to do a quick delivery and move on. But the sight of Clara trying so hard to keep her family together tugged at him. He couldn't just walk away. Fort Benton might have been a beacon of commerce once, but it had its share of unsavory elements. Saloons were rowdy with drifters, gamblers, and men rumored to be bandits. A day after their arrival, while Caleb was out buying supplies, Clara overheard heated voices downstairs. "I'm telling you, Mrs. Pruitt." A man snarled. "That squatter woman can't just stay here for free. This is a respectable house." Peering down the stairwell, Clara saw the speaker was a tall man in a wool coat, flanked by 2 rough-looking companions. They reeked of intimidation. Mrs. Pruitt stood her ground, arms crossed. "She's paying for the room." "None of your business, Mr. Eckhart." Mrs. Pruitt replied, her voice calm. "Now leave before I call the sheriff." Sheriff Lyle's busy with bigger problems than some charity case, Eckhart spat. "I'm just looking out for the interests of this town. We don't need riffraff or beggars draining our resources." Clara's stomach twisted. She bit her lip and retreated before Eckhart could spot her. She realized that to some folks here, she was just another burden. She held Wyatt tighter, heart pounding at the threat. When Caleb returned, she quietly told him about the confrontation. He frowned. "Eckhart. I've heard the name. He's the foreman for some local rancher or so, they say. But he's got a reputation for stirring trouble. Don't let him scare you." She nodded, but that night she scarcely slept. She prayed for James's guidance. Though she knew it wouldn't come, she still felt his presence in the hush of darkness. Over the next few days, Clara made a desperate search for any kind of employment. She inquired at the general store, owned by a Mrs. Mathers, offering to help with bookkeeping or sewing. She asked if the local seamstress needed an assistant. She even checked the saloons, though the thought of working in such places unnerved her. Unfortunately, the brutal winter and the stagnant economy meant few opportunities were available. Each rejection weighed heavily on her. Caleb tried to reassure her. "It's early yet. We'll find something." He paused, considering. "I might try to get hired on as a ranch hand, or see if the freight office needs another guard." He spent hours in the local saloons, not drinking for pleasure, but asking if any caravans needed extra help. Meanwhile, Clara would leave the twins with Mrs. Pruitt for a short time, paying a small fee for babysitting while she scoured the town. One afternoon, while visiting the tailor, she recognized a name on a ledger: Orville Jenkins. He was in town, apparently making a delivery of miracle tonics. Her mind flashed back to that fateful church social where Jenkins introduced her to James. If she could find him, perhaps he'd remember her. Maybe he had connections. Hope flickered in her chest. She hurried to the saloon where the tailor said Jenkins had been spotted. A stench of stale ale and cigar smoke assaulted her. The bartender raised an eyebrow, but she forced herself to be bold. "Is Orville Jenkins here?" she asked. A man at a nearby table looked up from his poker game. He was older, with a thinning moustache and watery eyes. Recognition sparked. Why, if it isn't little Clara from Kansas? He stood, nearly knocking over his chair. "I remember you. Married that fine young man, James, right?" The wave of grief hit her anew, but she managed a polite nod. "He passed recently. I've got 2 little boys. We're in a tight spot." Jenkins' face fell. "Oh, dear me, dear me. That's terrible news, lass. So sorry to hear it." He patted his chest as though searching for some remedy. "I wish I had a solution. Times have been tough for me, too. These folks in Fort Benton aren't much for my tonics, claim they're hogwash." He sighed. "I can lend you a little money, but I ain't got much." She forced a small smile. "I'm grateful for anything." He handed her a few dollars, barely enough to buy a loaf of bread and some baby supplies. Still, she thanked him and made her exit. Outside, she slumped against the saloon wall. Her dreams of a new beginning seemed to crumble bit by bit. She glanced at the money, swallowing her pride. For the sake of her twins, she'd accept help from anyone willing to give it. That evening, a knocking on the boarding house door startled everyone. Mrs. Pruitt opened it to reveal Mr. Eckhart again, flanked by his cronies. This time, they appeared more menacing. "I hear we have an itinerant mother staying here," Eckhart said, stepping inside without invitation. Clara holding Wyatt froze at the top of the stairs. Caleb emerged from the hallway, hand hovering near the colt on his hip. "Who's asking?" Eckhart smirked. "Name's Eckhart. I represent certain interests in this town. We can't be having every beggar and stray crowding Fort Benton, draining resources." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's not a beggar. She pays for her room." Eckhart's lip curled. "She won't find any job here, trust me. Folks in these parts don't have coin to waste on charity hires." He crossed his arms. "I suggest she head somewhere else if she values her family's safety." The threat was evident. Caleb took a step forward. "You'd threaten a woman with 2 infants in her arms." Eckhart shrugged. "Not me. But there's always accidents in winter fires, run-ins with bandits. Best not to press your luck." Caleb's hand gripped his revolver. Mrs. Pruitt quickly intervened, stepping between them. "Stop this nonsense. Get out of my house." Eckhart tipped his hat mockingly. "Ma'am, just delivering some friendly advice." With that, he and his men backed out, leaving a tense silence in their wake. Clara's face had gone white. "What am I to do?" she whispered. Caleb took a long, steadying breath. "We'll figure something out, but it seems we're not welcome here anymore." Later that night, as they sat in the attic room, Caleb revealed a desperate plan. "I met a rancher in the saloon, Jeremiah Talbot. He's old, half-blind, and looking to move his cattle to a more sheltered area. He'll pay a good sum for any help. It's risky blizzards, rustlers, all sorts of hazards. But it might be enough for us to get out of here, maybe to Helena or Butte, where we can start fresh. He paused, observing Clara's reaction. "Us," she echoed, brows furrowing. He exhaled slowly. "Look, you said you've got no one else. If you come with me, if we take this job together, we might earn enough money to keep you and the twins safe. At least until spring." Her gaze flicked to the sleeping infants. "I can't do much herding. And what about the babies in that environment?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "It's not ideal, but Mrs. Pruitt might watch them for a while if we pay her extra, or maybe we can find another arrangement." She mulled it over. The proposition was fraught with complications. Yet staying in Fort Benton under Eckhart's threats was worse. "All right," she whispered. "I'll do it. But only if you're sure it's our best shot." "It's the only shot I can see," he replied. "I won't let you down." 2 days later, they set out with Jeremiah Talbot's small herd, barely 24 scrawny cattle. Caleb rode point, guiding Isadora with practiced ease, while Clara sat behind him, scanning the horizon nervously. Talbot perched atop a creaking wagon, mumbled instructions, half-sighted eyes watering in the cold. Another hired hand, a young rancher named Billy Carver, trailed behind with the stragglers. The plan was to drive the cattle to a sheltered valley, about 15 miles south, near a creek fed by hot springs that seldom froze. Once the cows were secure, Talbot would pay them. Then presumably they'd return to Fort Benton, collect the twins, and figure out their next move. The journey was fraught with trouble from the start. The cattle, spooked by cold and hunger, scattered easily. Wolves lurked at the edges of sight. The wind cut mercilessly, and the temperature dipped so low that each breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. On the second night, while camped near a stony ridge, Clara tried to warm her trembling hands by the fire. She felt out of her element, uncertain how to help. Caleb sat across from her, whittling a piece of wood to calm his nerves. Talbot snored loudly in his wagon, while Billy patrolled the perimeter rifle at the ready. Clara found her eyes often drifting toward Caleb, who remained as steady as a rock despite the hardships. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He nodded, an expression thoughtful. "Just thinking about the future. About you and the boys. About what it all means." She leaned forward, the firelight dancing across her face. "Caleb, I'm grateful. For everything." He met her eyes, a flicker of warmth in his gaze. "I know." They shared a quiet moment, an unspoken bond, forming a bond forged by adversity rather than simple affection. The third morning brought disaster. A group of rustlers, likely alerted by rumors of a small herd traveling, attacked just as the sun peeked over the ridge. Gunshots rang out, sending cows into a panic. Billy Carver shouted an alarm, firing his rifle at the shadowy figures behind the rocks. Caleb dove for cover, dragging Clara behind a fallen log. Bullets whizzed overhead. Talbot hollered, fumbling blindly for his shotgun in the wagon. 2 rustlers rushed forward, bandanas obscuring their faces. Caleb took aim with his Colt, picking off one with a clean shot to the shoulder. The other fired wildly, nearly hitting Clara, but she ducked and screamed. Adrenaline surged in her veins. She grabbed the spare revolver Caleb had given her, though her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it. As the firefight intensified, Clara forced herself to line up the pistol. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil jerked her arm back, but the shot went wide, kicking up dirt near the rustler's feet. Still, the sudden barrage from both Caleb and Billy forced the rustlers to retreat. With curses echoing through the canyon, the attackers scrambled back into the rocky outcrops and vanished. When the dust settled, Billy was grazed in the thigh. Talbot bruised from falling off the wagon. Clara's ears rang and her breath came in ragged gasps. Caleb moved to her side, gripping her arms. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. No, I'm all right." He pulled her to her feet. "Good." His voice softened. "You did fine," Talbot grumbled, checking his damaged wagon. "Blasted thieves. This is exactly why I hired you." He eyed Clara, frowning slightly. But then he shrugged. "Guess you're not so useless after all." Despite the successful defense, the cattle had scattered, and the wagon's wheel was shattered beyond repair. They spent hours corralling the herd again, patching Billy's wound, and makeshift fixing the wheel. By the time they continued on, all were exhausted nerves frayed. That night they made camp in a shallow ravine. The earlier ambush left everyone shaken. While Talbot slept off the brandy he'd drunk to calm his nerves, Billy Carver kept watch. Caleb and Clara huddled near the fire. She was still trembling, and not just from the cold. The memory of gunshots, the acrid smell of powder, the fear that she might never see her babies again. It was all swirling in her mind. "I almost died," she whispered. "You didn't," Caleb reassured her. "We're still here." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "You must think me so weak." He shook his head emphatically. "I think you're stronger than you know." He paused, a troubled look crossing his features. "Look, there's something I need to tell you. A part of my past." She drew back, slightly confusion knitting her brow. He sighed. "I've had a reputation, you could say. I've done things I'm not proud of. Before I met you, I was on the run from a group of men who wanted me dead. I got caught up in a feud between ranchers, ended up shooting a man who threatened my father. After that, I fled. Been drifting ever since." Clara stared at him, heart pounding. "So you're a wanted man." "Not officially," he said quickly. "But there are folks out there who'd love to see me hang. I want you to know what kind of man you're dealing with." For a long moment she said nothing, just studied his face by firelight. Then she quietly said, "You saved my life. Twice, actually. Whatever else you've done that counts for more." Relief softened his eyes. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not a saint, Clara, but I swear I'll protect you and the boys with my life." Emboldened by the moment, she inched closer, pressing her hand to his. "I trust you," she whispered. After countless setbacks, they finally reached the valley near the hot springs. Steam rose from the water, melting the snow along the banks. Tall pines offered some shelter from the wind. It was a welcome sight, promising safety for Talbot's cattle. They spent a day scouting the area, ensuring no rustlers or predators lurked nearby. Satisfied, Talbot paid Caleb and Clara their due. "Don't spend it all in one place," he joked, slapping the money into Caleb's hand. Then he eyed Clara. "I was wrong about you, ma'am. You've got spirit. If you ever need a job once winter's over, come back here. I might have use for you." She thanked him, though she doubted she'd return. The place held too many grim memories. Billy Carver said his goodbyes, heading off to rejoin family near Missoula. Talbot settled into a makeshift shack. Caleb and Clara packed their gear, ready to return to Fort Benton and reunite with the twins. Clara's heart ached from missing them so fiercely. They arrived back in Fort Benton, near dusk, weary from travel, but relieved to have money in their pockets. As they approached Mrs. Pruitt's boarding house, they noticed a gathering of townsfolk whispering among themselves. Mrs. Pruitt rushed out. "Clara." "Thank goodness you're here." Alarm gripped Clara. "My babies, are they all right?" "They're safe." I took them to the church when the trouble started." "What trouble?" Caleb demanded. "Eckhart." Mrs. Pruitt's voice trembled with anger. "He came around, asking questions, making accusations. He said if you returned, you'd be arrested for theft, claimed you stole money from a rancher's satchel. He's stirring up the sheriff, and half the town believes him." Clara's eyes widened. "That's absurd. Caleb would never." Mrs. Pruitt shook her head. "I know. But rumor spreads faster than wildfire. Sheriff Lyle is on the fence, but Eckhart has influential friends." Caleb muttered a curse. "He must have found out I was delivering Hutchins' package. Maybe he thinks there was more in it." He squared his shoulders. "I'll straighten this out." But Clara grabbed his arm. "Eckhart won't listen to reason. This is just another ploy to drive us out." Mrs. Pruitt nodded in agreement. "You'd best leave town tonight. Sheriff Lyle might side with Eckhart. It's safer if you go." Clara's heart sank. She'd only just returned. All she wanted was to hold her babies. "I can't leave without my sons." "Of course not," Mrs. Pruitt said. "They're at the church. Hurry before more trouble finds you." They rushed to the church, ignoring the suspicious glances from onlookers. Father Lyons greeted them in the foyer, cradling Wyatt, while William slumbered in a cradle. Clara gathered them in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My babies. Mama's here." Caleb spoke quickly to Father Lyons. "We need to leave town." "You've heard the rumors?" Father Lyons nodded sadly. "Eckhart has stirred up quite the hornet's nest. I can't say if the sheriff believes him, but it's too dangerous for you now." Clara bit her lip. "Where can we go?" Father Lyons thought for a moment. "There's a ranch 30 miles west, run by a decent man named Robert Bucky Daniels. He sometimes hires workers, no questions asked, but the journey is rugged and winter isn't over." Caleb set his jaw. "We'll make it." "Thank you, Father." The priest offered them a small pouch of coins and some provisions. "Godspeed," he whispered. With little time to plan, they set off under the cover of darkness. Clara rode with the twins on Isadora, while Caleb led the mare on foot. No farewell parties, no goodbyes, just a silent departure from a town that had turned hostile. The journey west proved strenuous, but not as dire as their earlier trials. They skirted known trails to avoid Eckhart's men. At last, they arrived at the Daniels Ranch, a modest spread nestled among rolling foothills. As luck would have it, Bucky Daniels was an old friend of Angus O'Connell. The name opened the door for them. Bucky, a man in his 50s, with a gentle demeanor, agreed to give them temporary shelter in exchange for labor. He had a few ranch hands, but welcomed the extra help. Caleb worked repairing fences and tending horses. Clara helped with cooking and mending clothes while watching over the twins. It was the most stable they'd felt in weeks. The ranch became a sanctuary, a place of relative peace. Little by little, the bond between Clara and Caleb deepened. She found solace in his presence, a warmth she never expected to feel after James's death. On quiet evenings, she'd watch him cradle Wyatt or make silly faces at William. The twins giggled, and her heart felt as though it might burst with gratitude and confusion. How could she feel so attached to another man so soon? Yet guilt gnawed at her. Did this betray James's memory? She wrestled with these doubts, praying for guidance. Winter slowly receded the snows, melting into muddy puddles across the ranch. Crocuses peeked through the thawing ground. The air smelled of renewal. One afternoon, Bucky pulled Clara aside. He cleared his throat awkwardly. Caleb's a good man. I see how he looks at you and how you look at him. Folks here wouldn't mind if you two decided to, settle. We could use a permanent ranch couple on this spread." Clara blushed. "I haven't thought about that. It's all so sudden." Bucky gave a fatherly smile. "Life's short in these parts. Don't let good chances slip by." Later that day, Caleb found Clara by the paddock tending the twins. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple copper ring. "It's not much," he said, cheeks burning red. "But I've been thinking. We could get married. Your boys need a father, and He exhaled, meeting her gaze. "I need you, Clara. I think I always will." Tears welled in her eyes. She looked at William and Wyatt, then at this man, who had risked everything to save them time and time again. Memories of James flickered across her mind, but she sensed that James would want her to survive to love again, if it meant security for their children. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll marry you." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, his eyes full of hope and relief. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, then knelt to ruffle the twins' hair. "We're a family now," he said softly. "I'll do right by all of you." They married under the budding cottonwood tree near the ranch house, with Bucky Daniels officiating in a simple ceremony. A few ranch hands stood as witnesses along with the cook and stable boy. Clara held each twin on her hip as she recited her vows, tears slipping down her cheeks. Caleb's voice cracked with emotion when he promised to love, honor, and protect her and her boys. In that moment, all the strife and sorrow they'd endured seemed to fade into a memory. They were forging a new bond, a lifeline in a land where survival often demanded solidarity. Afterward, they shared a humble feast of roast beef potatoes and apple pie. The ranch hands serenaded them with an off-key rendition of "Oh, My Darling Clementine." Clara laughed for the first time in what felt like ages, leaning into Caleb's side, feeling safe and wanted. Their bedroom became the small cabin on the far side of the property, a snug space with a roaring fireplace. The twins cooed in their makeshift crib, drifting to sleep as Caleb and Clara looked on with wonder and gratitude. Weeks passed and the ranch thrived. Clara grew adept at her tasks, and Caleb proved an invaluable ranch hand and protector. But echoes of their past troubles continued to simmer. Bucky received word from a traveling salesman, possibly Orville Jenkins again, that Eckhart was still raving about that thief who'd stolen from the good people of Fort Benton. Some said Eckhart was campaigning for sheriff, others that he'd gone to powerful ranchers to gather a posse. Caleb and Clara discussed whether they should move on to avoid any confrontation, but each time they decided to stay. Bucky needed them, and they felt they finally had a home. Their decision was tested one late spring day. Clara was hanging laundry under the bright sun, the twins crawling in the grass. Caleb was off mending fences. Suddenly, she heard horses approaching, the thud of hooves drawing closer. Her heart seized. She scooped up William and Wyatt, hustling them inside the cabin. From the window she saw two men dismounting. One was Eckhart. The other was a burly fellow with a scar across his cheek. They strode up to Bucky, who stood in front of the barn. "Where's that half-breed cowboy?" Eckhart demanded, loud enough for Clara to hear. Bucky's posture tensed. "Caleb's no thief. You've got no business here." Eckhart sneered. "I have business wherever I please. I've got a warrant." Sheriff Lyle signed it, courtesy of the judge in Helena. "That means I can arrest Caleb Thunderwood for suspected robbery." Clara's stomach dropped. She glanced at the twins, who sensed her fear and started whining. She grabbed a rifle from behind the door, uncertain what she'd do with it, but knowing she might need it. Just then Caleb appeared around the corner of the barn, a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. He froze at the sight of Eckhart. "So it's come to this," he muttered. "You can surrender now," Eckhart said. "Come back to Fort Benton and face justice." Bucky tried to intervene. "This is nonsense, Eckhart. He's done no wrong. If you take him, you'll have to go through me, and I'll see to it the real law gets involved." Eckhart laughed. "You an old man with a handful of ranch hands. Don't make me do something I'll regret." Caleb stepped forward, unarmed. "If you want to arrest me, do it. But leave my family be." Eckhart's eyes flicked to the cabin. "Family, huh? That poor widow and those brats. She made a mistake, hitching her wagon to you." His tone dripped contempt. Caleb's fists clenched. "Talk about my wife again, I'll make you eat those words." Eckhart smirked, motioning to his partner. The big man drew a revolver, pointing it at Caleb. "You can threaten all you want. Get on that horse or we'll take you by force." Clara watched from the doorway, heart hammering. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, uncertain if she could shoot another person. But the determination to protect her husband and children outweighed her fear. She stepped onto the porch, calling out, "Let him go, Eckhart. You know this is a farce." Eckhart turned, eyes narrowing. Ah, the bride. How touching. He jerked his head at his partner, who advanced on Caleb with a length of rope to bind his hands. Caleb didn't move his gaze, darting to Clara, silently imploring her not to risk herself. Bucky's ranch hands began to gather, forming a loose circle around the intruders. Billy Carver, who had rejoined them for a season's work, emerged with a rifle, flanking Clara. "We're not letting you take him," Billy said, voice firm. Tension crackled in the warm spring air. Eckhart's partner cocked his revolver. Clara leveled her rifle, though her hands shook. Bucky stepped forward, eyes cold. "You want to start a bloodbath, Eckhart? Because I guarantee you won't be leaving here in one piece." Eckhart scowled, weighing his odds. He hadn't expected so much resistance. He had the law on paper, but the ranchers had the advantage of numbers and position. At that moment, a thunder of hooves sounded in the distance. Everyone turned to see another rider galloping in Mr. Hamilton, the freight manager from Fort Benton, waving a piece of paper frantically. "Wait," Hamilton shouted, breathless. "I have a statement here from John B. Hutchins himself." He skidded to a halt, dismounting with a flourish. "It says that Caleb Thunderwood delivered his satchel without incident or theft. There was no robbery, no missing funds. This is a legal document, stamped in Helena." Eckhart's face twisted with anger. "You lying Hamilton," jabbed a finger at the paper. "Signed, sealed, and delivered." Sheriff Lyle must have been misled. "Eckhart, you have no grounds to arrest Mr. Thunderwood." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Clara felt relief flood her veins, tears springing to her eyes. Eckhart tried to save face, but the evidence was undeniable. Bucky crossed his arms triumphantly, while Billy Carver smirked. "Fine," Eckhart spat, lowering his gaze. "But this ain't the end, Thunderwood. I'll see you pay for everything someday." He and his partner mounted their horses and rode off, furious and humiliated. With Eckhart gone, the ranch exploded in jubilant whoops. Billy Carver clapped Caleb on the back. Bucky grinned widely, patting Hamilton's shoulder. Clara rushed into Caleb's arms, rifle tumbling to the ground, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. He held her tightly, whispering reassurances. "It's over. she breathed, burying her face in his chest. Caleb stroked her hair. "We're safe, Clara. We can finally breathe." Mr. Hamilton handed the official statement to Caleb. "I came as soon as I heard. Hutchins got wind of Eckhart's nonsense and sent me with this proof. Glad I made it in time." He tipped his hat. "I'll be heading back to Fort Benton now, but I wanted to do what's right." Clara thanked him profusely, voice trembling with gratitude. He nodded with a humble smile and rode away, leaving the newly minted family to savor their triumph. Spring deepened into a gentle summer, and the Daniels Ranch burst with life. Pastures turned green, flowers dotted the hills, and the aroma of fresh earth filled the air. Caleb and Clara worked side by side, forging a partnership that went beyond mere marriage. They were allies, lovers, parents, and survivors. Word spread that Eckhart had lost face in Fort Benton, his influence waning. Some said he slinked off to parts unknown. Others claimed he tried to rally a new posse, but no one in town believed him anymore. Regardless, he remained a ghost of a threat, overshadowed by the bright future the Thunderwoods were carving out. The twins grew like sturdy saplings, toddling around the ranch, delighting in the open spaces. Clara taught them words like horse and mama, while Caleb showed them how to pet the ranch dogs gently. Each day felt like a new blessing. Late one afternoon, Clara strolled down to the paddock, holding Wyatt's hand, while William tottered beside them. Caleb was mending a fence post, stripped to his undershirt, in the sweltering sun. She paused, heart swelling with love she never thought she'd feel again after James. Now, in a way she couldn't fully explain, James felt like a guiding spirit who had led her to this second chance. Caleb turned, smiling when he saw her. He strode over, scooping up the twins, planting a playful kiss on each child's cheek. Then he leaned in, brushing a tender kiss to Clara's lips, a silent promise of devotion. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in russet and gold, Clara gazed out over the land that had become their haven. From the stark terror of being left to die in the snow, she had emerged into a life brimming with hope, love, and belonging. Her journey had been paved with heartbreak and trials, but now she stood on the threshold of a future that glowed with possibility, and that she thought was the greatest miracle of all, finding love again in the wild frontier where the promise of tomorrow could shine even brighter than the heartbreaks of yesterday. And so ends the heart-wrenching yet triumphant tale of Clara McAllister, widowed, frozen, and outcast, saved by a cowboy whose heart was bigger than the boundless plains. Together they braved ruthless winters, cutthroat bandits, and the cruelties of small-town gossip. Their love story is a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the human heart, proving that even in a land as harsh as the Wild West, hope can take root and flourish. If Clara's journey stirred your soul, don't let her bravery fade into the sunset. Make sure it's shared far and wide. If you felt the raw power of her trials and triumphs, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support lets us continue bringing you stories of resilience, love, and adventure. Spread the word and keep the flame of frontier courage blazing for generations to come.